Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome back. And when I say welcome back, there's a funny story that I'll tell you in a few minutes. But this is Alan Miller with Access to Democracy. We have two first-time guests, and that is Robert Rivas, an attorney from Florida, and Gary Wederspahn from Dakota County.
Yes.
And local boy makes good. And our topic today is one of the most serious ones that we have ever dealt with. It's the Final Exit Network. It's the organization that has not only a book, but people who will assist somebody at the end of life who wishes to pass, and not on someone else's terms, but on their own terms, provides information in that regard. The material is so sensitive that we were 10 minutes into this interview and our equipment committed suicide. So I hope that it's not going to be prosecuted, because we are in Dakota County and they seem to prosecute for the mere mention of assisted suicide. Gary, you have been involved for a number of years with organizations. You have a reputation as a civil libertarian. How long have you been involved with Final Exit Network?
Well, with Final Exit Network since the beginning of that organization, but prior to that, its predecessor organization in the 1980s, early 80s, I've been a member of that ever since. So I would say a sum total of maybe approaching 25 years now in the Right to Die movement.
The Hemlock Society being
The predecessor.
Right.
And Robert, your law firm is in Florida, but I know you've gone all over the country in terms of the Final Exit. You've got at least 2 decades of experience in this. You're recognized as one of the few experts in the field. And you've seen to it during this period, I think 4 states have legalized assisted suicide. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. Chronologically, the first was Oregon, then Washington, then Vermont, and just this year, California joined the ranks of states that have a law that allows a person under certain carefully prescribed circumstances, terminally ill, approved by a doctor, evaluated, and they can obtain a prescription from their physician to allow them to check out at the time of their choosing after they get the prescription.
Painlessly and by their own choice.
And many people choose not to. Roughly a third don't even ever use it, but it gives them great comfort throughout the dying process. One of the things that's so awful about the process is the loss of control, and this makes people feel that they have some measure of control.
And the fact of the matter is that there are several states, some of our more progressive states, Arizona, and was it Mississippi?
Georgia.
Georgia. When I say progressive, I'm saying in quotes. where they have found that there is a First Amendment, there is freedom of speech, and you can discuss these things without being prosecuted. But here in River City, known as Dakota County, that's not the case. And a jury of 12 people, based on a charge by Judge Wilton of the District Court earlier this year, convicted Final Exit Network of the crime of assisted suicide. They tried, but they found that they couldn't put a corporation or a group in jail, so they levied the maximum fine. And here we are today as the case is about to go up on appeal, and the notice of appeal has been filed. But what's the language that we're playing with? And we're talking about First Amendment, we're talking about free speech.
Well, as a consequence of this case and the precedent that it sets, Minnesota has now become the only state in the country where it is a crime to give people information, to give people lawfully obtained information about how they can terminate their own suffering. There's no assistance involved. Final Exit Network does not assist in suicides. There was no evidence in the trial court that Final Exit Network assisted in any suicide. But what the evidence showed is that Final Exit Network has volunteers who are called exit guides who go to people and give them information about how to terminate their own suffering
To ease the pain
in a way that's
of
assured
leaving this life,
and dignified.
whether you believe in an afterlife or not. If you are in terrible pain, if you are terminal, if you know it's only a matter of time.
If it's intolerable, is the term I think that we like to use. In your own judgment, you own your own life. You can decide if it's tolerable or not. It's a hopeless situation. There's no improvement possible or likely. And under those circumstances, you have a choice, we feel. Our slogan is, my life, my death, my choice. And that's, in fact, what attracted me to this organization.
And it seems that that's something that should be available to anyone. To anyone. Why should you have to live knowing you're terminal with horrendous pain? And we discussed before our equipment broke down on us the fact that, number one, the Final Exit book has sold over 1 million copies, and there are 2 that are available here in Dakota County, so that if you take the book out, I guess the library system will be prosecuted for assisting in a suicide. I don't know, but I wouldn't wish that on our librarians. And number 2, of the 30,000 handgun deaths in this country every year, which is frightening in and of itself, about 2/3 of them are suicides. What's better, to go out with dignity or to go out with half your head blown off? I mean, to be just very frank about it.
A lot of the people that Final Exit Network provides its services to are people who are going to use the gun if they can't find an alternative. And so we send exit guides who are trained in giving compassionate support under those circumstances, and all the exit guides do is inform somebody of how they can induce their own deaths. And these people are screened. We don't do this for anybody. This is not a pro-suicide organization. But Final Exit Network, after screening people, gives them information. And it's now a crime in Minnesota to give information.
The screening process is to be sure that the person is in sound mind. And we insist, in fact, that people consider every other possible alternative and to recognize the seriousness of this decision. But we will honor that choice. If you decide, it's your life, we believe, and you should have a right to make that decision.
Now, this statute has been scrutinized earlier by another member of the district court, Karen Asfog, who is a judge, who, as a matter of fact, has been a guest on this show. And she found that portions of it violated the First Amendment. That was upheld by the Court of Appeals. That was upheld by our Supreme Court. But it came back. It came back and went to trial earlier this year. Now, why is that?
It's a very convoluted history, but we moved to dismiss the charges back in 2012, and in 2013, Judge Asphaug ruled that two provisions in the statute were unconstitutional. It used to have three distinct things that were all three a crime in Minnesota. One of them was advising a suicide, the other was encouraging a suicide, and the third was assisting. So while conceding and recognizing that there's no question a state can make it against the law to assist in a suicide, she ruled, and then we went to the Court of Appeals on the fact that, and the Supreme Court on the fact that the First Amendment protects the right to advise or encourage, because that's just pure speech. So we thought the battle over pure speech was won almost 2 years ago before this trial. But in an almost offhand reference, the Supreme Court suggested that the word assisting could be defined to include, these are the precise words, speech that enables a suicide. So speech that enables a suicide, if that can be a crime in Minnesota, how does that differ from advising or encouraging? Well, it doesn't.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
It's all speech that tells people how to do it.
To anybody's state of mind. Two people having an argument. One says to the other, "Why don't you go blow your brains out?" The other, being a sensitive person, goes and blows their brains out. Did person number one then commit the crime of assisting in suicide? Probably more than Final Exit Network.
What I'm more concerned about is a situation that more commonly arises in loving families in Minnesota every single day, as they confront the stresses of somebody in their family who's dying, and they talk to the family member about their alternatives. And I'm not talking about assistance in a suicide. I'm talking about people who talk to their loved ones about whether they could discontinue taking a certain drug, whether they could increase the amount of morphine they take, whether they could use the voluntary termination of hydration and sustenance as a means of inducing their own deaths. Mom telling dad any of those three options in the privacy of their home is a crime now in Minnesota.
At least
Well,
in Dakota County.
In Dakota County, yes.
Well,
And until our Court of Appeals and Supreme Court rule on it, it could be the entire state. That is the prevailing law as of this moment.
a cautious lawyer would have to advise people in Minnesota that it's a crime anywhere in Minnesota, because the Dakota County Trial Court derived its jury instructions from a reference in the Supreme Court of Minnesota. So it seems to be the law of Minnesota now.
Now, when Judge Wilton charged the jury, did he give them any leeway?
No, he instructed them that they were obligated by the law of Minnesota to convict Final Exit Network if the state proved that Final Exit Network gave information to the decedent. Just gave her any, including, so for instance, some of the evidence that Final Exit Network was convicted of was telling her the URL of the website where you can download for yourself a copy of Derek Humphrey's book, Final Exit, which is a how-to book of self-deliverance. For giving her the URL, that's a crime. Telling her that it's available at Barnes & Noble. Telling her that it's available at Books A Million. We found that there are several bookstores right now in Dakota County that have it on the shelf.
Yes.
And any bookstore that doesn't have it on the shelf will gladly order it and have it within a day or two, but you don't need to wait that long because you can get it all online. It's an e-book. You can have it downloaded instantly.
Or you can just go online and punch in assisted suicide and get a wealth of material.
If we didn't tell you how to find the URL, you could find it yourself. But it's a crime to tell somebody how to find
And
the
in
URL.
researching this interview, I just punched in assisted suicide, and the first thing that came up is "you're too young." But after that, no, in all seriousness. A wealth of material spilled out, including one case in the United States Supreme Court, and these peripheral cases in other more enlightened courts. And I might say, having just completed a European trip, that several of the countries that we were in, I inquired, and assisted suicide is permitted.
Even in entertainment videos, there are a number of interesting and real new videos on suicide and discussion of the issues and so on. So it's not limited to Derek's book by any means. There are stage plays, there are discussions and debates on television, on public television. So that could be construed, I suppose, as enabling a person to make this decision.
And I cannot wrap my head around the fact that speech is an enabler, because you are not putting a gun in someone's hand. You are not putting the poison in someone's hand. You are not utilizing any of these other suggestions of a way to exit peacefully and with dignity. And that is beyond me. I mean, we have seen a tremendous erosion of our rights in the Bill of Rights in the last few years, probably since 9/11. The Patriot Act being certainly a major erosion of our rights. But we still have been pretty secure about free speech. And free speech apparently no longer exists, at least here in Dakota County. Now, where's our case right at the moment?
Just to clarify exactly what the case is that's on appeal, we filed the notice of appeal on November 10th. It'll be months. It'll be early 2016 when we file our first brief, and then the state a month later will file their briefs. We'll have an oral argument in the summer. It's probably next fall that there will be a decision of the Court of Appeals. That's the intermediate appellate court, and then it'll have to go to the Supreme Court. Whichever side loses is bound to appeal. But to be clear, the way that the law is understood now by the trial court in Dakota County, and what I think is probably safe to say, this is what the law of Minnesota is that communicating information about how to induce your own death is a crime only if it's communicated by an individual who is aware that the specific person they're talking to intends or is thinking about dying and might use the information for that purpose. So it makes it, just in defense of Minnesota, it's not a crime to sell a copy of the book or to hand somebody a copy of the book.
Or recommend the book.
Recommend the book, yeah. And it's only a crime if you're speaking to somebody who you know is contemplating suicide at the time.
Or maybe it's a crime to read the book. I mean, I don't know.
It is interesting too that while suicide itself is not a crime, so for assisting in a suicide to be a crime is the only law that I've ever heard of, and I've been looking around for years for something comparable. It's the only law that is known where it's against the law to assist in doing something that is not itself illegal.
That's an interesting.
That's not very logical.
Interesting twist. It's completely illogical.
It does not compute.
Well, the Supreme Court of the United States upheld the idea that states can criminalize assisting in a suicide, and I don't dispute that.
That's a ways back, though.
1997.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, where do we go from here? Are there other parties who are joining you in this appeal?
Yes, the largest organization in America involved in the Right to Die movement, the most respected, the Death with Dignity National Center, based in Portland, Oregon, is joining as an amicus party.
Which is friend of the court for those
right. They're going to file
lawyers.
A brief arguing, giving some different perspective, but nonetheless arguing for our point of view to the court. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation is going to file a brief. The First Amendment Lawyers Association, they have nothing to do with the Right to Die movement, but when they heard what happened in Minnesota, they were appalled So they jumped in to file an amicus brief, and the Atheists for Human Rights, a Minnesota-based organization, is filing a brief.
And of course, those names will cause the blood pressure to go up in some people, particularly perhaps the prosecutor here. But the fact of the matter is that we're talking about the First Amendment. We are talking about, and the case in point, this lady exited in 2007. What was the proof of your active participation, the organizations, in her death?
None. Our organization was convicted exclusively for giving her information and agreeing to go sit by her side, be present with her, because Final Exit Network volunteers believe that no one should ever have to die alone, and she didn't want her family to know. So Final Exit Network's volunteers took the implements and left the house with no sign of her own involvement or its involvement present. So her death was ruled to be of natural causes on that day. And that's what she wanted, and that's what should have...
out of respect for her.
That's what should have remained the case as far as her family ever should have known. Until 3 years later, the district attorney of Dakota County decided to announce to them that Final Exit Network was somehow culpable in her death.
Is there a statute of limitations that comes into play here or not?
Minnesota's statute of limitations has a provision that said if somebody is not present in the state for any period of time after the crime, that a person is not present in the state, that the statute of limitations doesn't run for that period of time. Well, nobody who was present at this lady's death was ever present in the state except on that day, so the statute of limitations never would have begun to run.
It's just an incredible case. And were there witnesses at the trial?
There was Dr. Lawrence Egbert, a Johns Hopkins anesthesiologist who was at the time Final Exit Network's medical director, is the only witness who testified at the trial who actually had firsthand personal knowledge of anything about the case. And he explained Final Exit Network's protocols and practices in detail. And as he explained, and there was no evidence to contradict, Final Exit Network scrupulously does not assist in suicides. Final Exit Network only gives information, and we have always trained our volunteers in the belief that if they don't personally do something physically to assist, say, hand somebody a potion.
Hemlock.
Yeah, here's the hemlock. Drink the hemlock. Something physical. In the absence of anything physical that they can't be convicted, we've always taught them that, and we've taught them never to violate the rule that you don't assist. And you don't provide any materials. You don't go to the store for anybody. You don't buy anything for anybody. We don't even buy the book. Don't lend the book. Final Exit, Derek Humphrey's book, we tell them that they have to get a copy of it for themselves. So they read the book, and as far as the trial court in Dakota County is concerned, the fact that we told this decedent how to obtain a copy of the book for herself was proof that we committed speech. Imagine using the words committed speech. Did you ever think you'd hear the words committed speech? We committed speech that enabled a suicide.
And now, suppose someone is unable to speak and has to use sign language. By this interpretation, using sign language would be the same way as enabling. I just shake my head.
Or writing a note.
Well, when I say speech, any means of communication is speech within the meaning of the free speech clause of the First Amendment. It doesn't make any difference whether you put it on a billboard or leave somebody an audio tape or write it down, hand somebody a book. It's all speech.
Now, I think we have a graphic that we can pull up, and because I'm sure there are people who are going to be watching this who would like to have this information available just in case. However, because we've had this program here, I suspect that I can now be prosecuted
For providing information.
for providing information and speaking about First Amendment rights. I shake my head again. There are 4 states, however, who have permitted doctor-assisted suicide, as some countries in Europe have done.
There happens to be a bill in our own legislature here, both in the House and in the Senate, to try to pass a similar bill here, but it's tied up in committee, has been for some time now, but that may come out of committee, and my fellow Minnesotans may want to know about that at some point.
Well, if we can assist again in that regard, I just think everybody has a right to know, and a right to know how restrictive this decision is. The First Amendment is not restrictive. There are certain prohibitions. The law school classic is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. But this is a step beyond that. And I really think it inhibits you from your own decision by going to somebody who can assist in the most difficult of decisions, to end your own life.
The term chilling comes up, right? It chills that environment of free speech and exchange of information, even showing compassion in that situation. If you were suffering and you say that it's intolerable, and I even mention, well, there's something you can do about this, I'm liable.
I guess so.
You mentioned the liberal orientation of some of the groups that are filing amicus briefs in support of our position in the Court of Appeals, but I marvel at the idea that anybody who is conservative would think that the right to free speech is some kind of a radical liberal concept. It seems to me that liberals and conservatives ought to be united behind the idea that the state of Minnesota can't make it a crime to give lawfully obtained information to people about anything, whether it's suicide or any other subject.
To be continued, undoubtedly to be continued, with this case and with the law, and perhaps with the legislature. Robert Rivas, Gary Wederspahn, I thank you for coming in and sharing this with us. It opens up a whole new Pandora's box of impinging on the Bill of Rights. Thank you so much.
Would you come join us at the oral argument?
Absolutely.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Alan.
Thank you.